right, week 11 of college football is in the books, which means we are just a few weeks away from the end of the regular season, and I can't believe it. But before we break the games down, please drop a like, comment, subscribe. It means a lot to me in this channel. And I know that I'm dropping this video a little late. I was busy proposing to my now fiance, so I was not able to get this video out as early as I normally am. However, we're still going to break down all the games. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. Starting with BYU versus Texas Tech. That's right, the top two teams in the Big 12 clash this weekend. And when the dust settled, BYU was splattered all over Lubbock. And I told you guys last week that the winner of this game was probably going to be a lock for the conference title game. And I also told you that I believe that team would be Texas Tech. And I feel pretty good about both of those takes right now. I also said that the loser of this game would also probably make it to the title game. And while Cincinnati could shake things up here, I still feel good about that as well. As for this game itself, Texas Tech took care of business at home when the lights were the brightest. And honestly, I saw this one coming. BYU is a good team. Don't get me wrong, but they are a complete mismatch for Texas Tech. And that's something we talked about last week. BYU came into this game with one of the top 15 rushing attacks in the country, but the problem is they hadn't really faced an elite run defense yet, and this weekend they went against the number one run defense in the country, and so something had to give. Either BYU was going to prove that their rushing attack could be elite no matter who they faced, or Texas Tech was going to expose them, and well, the latter happened. Texas Tech exposed them. We hadn't really seen BYU in a situation where they were forced to throw the ball to come back and win a game, and it turns out they're just not really built for that type of game. And you add in the fact that the turnover margin went completely against them. They had 3 turnovers, and Texas Tech had 0. This one got pretty ugly pretty fast. Texas Tech also dominated a field position battle, and honestly, it could have been even worse. Tech left a lot of points on the field, I felt, and they still won pretty comfortably. And at the end of the day, Tech is clearly the better team and a nightmare matchup for the Mormons. If these two meet again in the conference title game, which I do think is what we're going to see, I think we'll probably get a similar result. The Red Raiders are the real deal, and in my opinion, they're the only team from the Big 12 that is actually built to contend for a national title. Now, don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that they are unbeatable. They can be taken down. We saw it happen against Arizona State, albeit with a backup quarterback, but I don't think they're a guaranteed lock to win the conference, even if I strongly believe that's what's going to happen. What I am saying is that if there is a team from the Big 12 that makes it to the playoffs and is actually going to have a chance to go the distance, it is Texas Tech. They're the only team in the conference that is built in a way that can hang with the best teams outside of the conference. So yeah, this one just confirmed what I think we already knew. Texas Tech is built different, and BYU found that out the hard way. Moving on to Oregon versus Iowa, and I was not quite as right about this game because I picked Iowa to win outright. And while they didn't actually pull it off, the dynamics of this game were almost exactly how I thought they would be. Iowa made it ugly. They dragged Oregon into a rock fight, and the weather definitely played in their favor, which is part of the reason I picked Iowa to win in the first place. Basically, I said that if Oregon was going to win this game, they'd have to beat Iowa at their own game. And I didn't think that they would be able to, but I was wrong. Oregon went into Iowa City and beat Iowa playing Iowa's brand of football. They didn't rely on flash or spreading the field. They won being physical, disciplined, and opportunistic. And get this, Iowa actually had more passing yards in this game, and it still just didn't matter. Oregon controlled the game in all the ways that counted. They won the turnover margin. They got a safety, which ended up being the difference in the score. This was a 2-point game, and Oregon just found a way to win at the end. When the lights were bright, Oregon made the clutch plays and got out of there with a win, and they did it on the road in bad weather with a ton of injuries. And to me, that says a lot about the growth of this Oregon team. They've proven that they can win in more ways than one. They don't have to play perfect or score 40 to beat you. They can line up and grind out a win when things get ugly. Nobody's really talking about it, but I actually think Oregon is in a better position to win a national title this year than they were last year, even though I think they are a little less talented than they were last year overall. I'm not saying they're going to win a national title or even make the playoffs for that matter. Their schedule's pretty tough, and they still got a lot of work to do. But they're more battle-tested than they were last season. They faced adversity. They've been in games like this one, and they found ways to win. And if Oregon does make it to the playoffs, I think this game and this kind of win is exactly the type of experience that will prepare them for the big stage. Moving on to Indiana versus Penn State. And man, Penn State was this close to pulling off a major upset at home against the number 2 team in the country. But at the very last moment, Fernando Mendoza and Omar Cooper Jr. pulled the rug out right from under the Nittany Lions and pulled out a win. And honestly, I'm not surprised this was such a close game. There's a reason I put it on my upset alert meter last week. Penn State is a better talent roster than Indiana. They just haven't been a better team. And when you've got that kind of talent sitting there, even if the team as a whole is underperforming, they can flash at times. And usually it'll show up in these Super Bowl moments, and I think that's exactly what happened here. I don't think that Indiana is any less good of a team because this one was close. If anything, I get them more credit for going into Happy Valley and finding a way to win when the chips were down. Penn State didn't play like a 3-5 team on Saturday. They played up to their talent level. Their defense was swarming Mendoza. Their run game looked like we expected it to look in the preseason. And with less than 2 minutes left, it looked like Indiana was not going to be able to pull this one out, especially after that early sack on that drive. But Mendoza kept his composure. He kept connecting with his receivers. And then that catch by Omar Cooper Jr. at the end was just incredible. That was the moment of the game and one of the biggest moments of the year. Like I said with Oregon earlier, wins like this matter. Being able to respond when you're down, to stay composed when the pressure is at its highest. That's what great teams do. That's why I think Georgia is in such a good position this year, because they live in those moments. So my point here is that this win for Indiana is actually better than a blowout ever would have been for them. It showcased their resilience. It confirmed that this Indiana team is for real, and it proved that when the pressure's on, they can deliver. However, for Texas A&M, they did not have to go on the road and struggle to win this weekend. They took care of business just like I expected, and I've been telling y'all for weeks now, A&M is the best team in the country. I know some people think that's Ohio State, and sure, from the eye test perspective, I could see that. Maybe that's true, but here's the difference. Ohio State hasn't really been tested, so we don't know. A&M has. They've been playing tough games, they've been pushed, and they've proven they can win in a variety of different ways. So no, I was not shocked at all when A&M took care of business here. I expected it, and it was on the road, sure. Yeah, Missouri is one of the best rushing attacks in the country right now, and they have a pretty fresh quarterback with a lot of talent, one that A&M didn't have a lot of tape on, but it didn't matter. A&M has earned that trust. They've shown that they can handle situations like this without blinking. And going on the road and doing this. They are one of the most balanced, talented, and battle-tested teams in the country, and they're always ready for the moment. Mike Elko has built a machine in College Station, and what I love about this team is that they can win any kind of game. Like I said, whether it's a shootout, defensive grind, or something in between. Now, I'm not going to go piece by piece breaking down the entire roster because you've already heard me talk about Marcel Reed, Mario Craver, Casey Concepcion before, all those guys. We talked about them before. What I will say is this. I do not think Missouri is as good as a team as people think that they are, with or without Pabula. So I'm not saying that this one's going to define A&M in any type of way. But here's the thing. Going on the road in the SEC and winning is never easy, and A&M just keeps making it look effortless. Now, Alabama also went on the road this weekend, and while they didn't look quite as dominant as A&M, they still won comfortably. And honestly, this game never felt like it was in doubt. Didn't shock me one bit that they won this game. I predicted it. As much as I would have loved to see LSU win this game at night in Death Valley, they just aren't good enough offensively to pull that off. They just don't have the firepower. LSU once again struggled to move the ball, especially on the ground. Garrett Nussmeier ended up getting benched, and I was really curious to see if this offense might look any different without Brian Kelly and Joe Sloan calling plays, but unfortunately, they just are what they are at this point. They can't run the ball to save their lives, and neither can Alabama, to be fair. But the difference is Alabama has other levels that they can go to offensively. They've got a pretty competent quarterback, one of the best in the country. Ty Simpson, he missed a few big throws here in this game, but overall, he still is playing great football, and the wide receiver core has been just really rock solid. That Alabama team is not perfect, but they're pretty hard to beat, and it's still kind of wild to think back and remember that this team lost to Florida State in Week 1 because this is not the same Alabama team that they were in Week 1. They've improved, they settled in, and they are rolling right now. And honestly, I think they might continue to roll throughout the rest of the regular season. I don't think anyone's stopping them until they get to the SEC Championship game. So no, I'm not surprised that LSU couldn't pull off the upset here. Alabama just took care of business, and that's what great teams do. Moving on to Georgia versus Mississippi State, and I did put Georgia on my upset alert meter this week. They've played a bunch of really close games against inferior opponents, and I keep thinking that one of these times is going to catch up to them. Now, I still pick Georgia because they are the better team, and they're definitely better at finishing games than Mississippi State. But honestly, I thought that this was going to be another close game that was honestly closer than it should have been. Turns out Georgia must have been listening to me because they finally gave me a game that I didn't have to stress about. They came out sharp, played clean, and looked in control from start to finish. It really feels like they're peaking at the right time. They look balanced, offensively, defensively, everything just clicked. And honestly, I don't have a ton else to say. They did exactly what a playoff contender should do this time of year. They cruised past what should have been a trap game with Texas looming next week. But instead of looking ahead, they locked in, they took care of business, and they handled the job like pros. Now, let's talk about the Group of 5 race because things continue to heat up here, and honestly, it's kind of trending in my favor. Now, I didn't predict Tulane to beat Memphis. However, I have been rooting for USF to sneak their way into the playoff, and this result definitely helped. Tulane broke this game open in the second quarter, and while Memphis tried to make it interesting late, it just wasn't enough. Tulane completely shut down the run and lived in the backfield all night. It felt like every single play they were disruptive of something, whether it be pressures, sacks, tackles for loss. They just dominated up front. Plus, Retzlaff had himself a night. So yeah, the G5 race is getting really spicy right now, and I'm here for it. Moving on to Vanderbilt versus Auburn, and Hugh Freeze got fired. The defensive coordinator stepped in, and suddenly Auburn went from having a great defense and no offense to having no defense and tons of offense, which I don't know how that makes sense, but the one thing that hasn't changed is that Auburn still finds ways to lose games. They were up 20-10 at halftime, and it looked like they were about to take Vanderbilt's playoff hopes right out from under them, but the Commodores rallied back and lived to fight another day. And if they can take care of Kentucky next week, that Tennessee game suddenly becomes very interesting. Another heartbreak for Auburn fans, obviously. Even when they finally put up points and get solid quarterback play, it still isn't enough. And for Vanderbilt, believe it or not, they are still very much alive in the playoff hunt. It sounds crazy, but it's true. Now let's talk about the ACC because things just got really interesting. Cal beat Louisville and Wake Forest took down Virginia. Both of those teams were already hanging on to playoff hopes by a thread, and now the conference might actually be in danger of not getting anyone in the playoffs at all. We've already seen the committee that clearly values the Big 12 over the ACC. That much is pretty obvious at this point. But I think most people still assume the ACC champ would make it to the playoffs. And to be fair, if Georgia Tech wins out and wins the conference, I still think that holds true. But what if that's not how it plays out? Because here's where it gets fun. The Group of 5 has quietly had a really solid year. And the playoff language specifically says that the 4 highest ranked conference champs get an automatic bid. So what happens if the G5 champ, say USF, ends up ranked higher than the ACC champ? Well, let's look at the current ACC odds. Duke is sitting right behind Georgia Tech, and Tech has to play somebody in the title game. So let's just say it does end up being Duke, and Duke wins. Well, then what? Are we really going to put Duke above USF or James Madison or even Tulane, who literally has a head-to-head win over them? I don't think so. So at that point, the ACC would be relying on an at-large bid. And the only team that even has a realistic argument for that is Miami. And even that looks like a stretch. So my point is, we could be heading towards one of the wildest playoff seasons yet. And right now, the ACC is not doing itself any favors. Well, that about wraps up this week. And as always, thank you guys for watching. And if you made it this far, make sure to drop a like, comment your biggest takeaway or upset pick of the week, and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.